My name is David. I'm on the teaching team, and I'm also a site leader of our Exeter location, and it's a great day to be together. We start a brand new series called Practicing the Way. This theme of our year has also been boldly dependent, and it's been some incredible times together because as we've discovered this theme for the year as a church, boldly dependent, discussions have begun to arise in people's lives on Sundays together, and also outside of the Sunday gathering and midweek when people are doing life with one another. Many of us have truly had our hearts shifted in maybe unexpected directions or found it on pathways that we were not even ready for, where we're learning what it means to have a bold vision, bold faith, bold values in truly trusting in God and not just in ourselves. It's like the rudder to the ship of our lives and our hearts has been adjusted, and our minds, bodies, and souls are feeling a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, drive again, or maybe for the first time ever in our lives. With that being said, our vision, part of our vision as a community, is to be a people group that explores and grows in their knowledge of Jesus and commitment to his church. We believe that it's essential to understand the depths of who this man Jesus was and is. But I might add, it isn't just about understanding him with a head knowledge. It's even more profound or life-changing to experience him through knowledge and commitment through a relationship with him. And if we're to be a church that says we're going to grow in our knowledge and commitment, what does this mean? What does this look like? And some of us today have been asking the question, do I even want to? So launching this series will help us grow in our knowledge of him, but also help us understand how do we commit ourselves and our lives to him and his church as we practice the way. As a pastor, I get the privilege to sit across tables in coffee shops, and my hope and dream is every time I come into a coffee shop, there's an Ethiopian blend, no sugar, no cream, because I don't want to ruin my coffee. Sorry, Tim Hortons. I've got to put sugar and cream there. I kind of avoid Tim Hortons, to be completely honest, but it's an Ethiopian blend. I hope so. And I get to listen and sit with people who have so many questions around life of faith. I sit across the table, and I get to hear questions that absolutely floor me. And I just sit there thinking, I have no idea how to help you, but pray for you in that moment. But then there's these moments of beauty and wonder where I sit across a table and I get a glimpse of a human being, a friend or a stranger, wrestling with the question around what does it mean to follow Jesus? You don't have to have grown up in church to actually hear that language, follower of Jesus or Christ follower. We tend to hear that language all the time, or maybe in a world today that we live in right now, we don't hear it as much as we should, but it is there, Jesus follower. I'd love to pose the question, and I hope this question sticks with you throughout the duration of the series. What if we weren't just Jesus followers? What if we weren't just Jesus followers? What if we were apprentices of Jesus? See, in our world that we live in right now, many of us follow many things. A lot of our world right now is driven and directed by the follow or follower culture. You may have a number by the people you follow on your Instagram account, TikTok, YouTube channel, whatever. It's like 649. You follow that many people. But as you go on in life and our lives begin to move forward, you begin to notice and realize that many of us aren't fully committed to the people that we follow. We check in here and there to our followers, but most of the time it's like speed scrolling or just mind-numbing scrolling. And if it works for our schedule, we really check into the things that we actually care about. But there seems to be, a lack of commitment in ways to the things that we follow in our world right now. And what's unfortunately happening to many people in our world, we treat our relationship with Jesus like this as well. No shame, no guilt here. Please don't feel that at all. But it happens to all of us, myself included. And see, here's the thing I'm getting at. I believe we need to be more intentional with our language when it comes to following this man that claimed to be the Son of God, who is Jesus. What does it mean to apprentice to him? Not just checking in when it feels good, or when it works with my schedule, or when I just feel like it because I'm supposed to, because I'm a Christian. Funny little insight on the Bible in the New Testament. Discipleship, the word discipleship or disciple can be translated to apprentice. A disciple is simply someone who has decided to be with another person, work underneath them, learn their skills, do what they do. John Mark Comer, the founder of an organization called Practicing the Way, says, if I had to put it simply, to be an apprentice of Jesus, to Jesus, means to reorganize your life around three goals. Be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. This is the hope for our series, that we as a community would join and journey together with one another in our apprenticeship to Jesus. And yes, we're all going to be at different stages of understanding this. And that's the beautiful piece about Vitalpoint Church. We all make room for people at different stages of understanding of how to walk in relationship with Him. But our hope for this series is that as we live this way, as we follow Jesus, apprentice to Him, become fully devoted apprentices to Him, I should say, our lives, our communities, our towns will be transformed through our apprenticeship to Him, where then it leads us to invest and invite others into that walk with Him as well. So for the remainder of our time together, I want to take some time to talk about a few things that we believe that will set up the rest of the weeks that we are going to be together to come really well. I encourage you, seriously, encourage you. If I could arm wrestle you and win, I would do it, but I'd probably lose. So I encourage you to prioritize this series in your life right now, because we're sensing and believing it's just not going to be a seasonal impact. It's going to be an eternal impact as you explore and grow in your apprenticeship to Jesus. See, what I've enjoyed over the last 3 years as I've been intentionally walking in my apprenticeship to Jesus is that I've discovered that this journey is from immaturity to maturity, from wounding to healing, from false self to true self. And that this journey that Jesus freely invites all of us to embark on, it's a choice that you and I actually have to discern and say, do I want this for my life? Maturity to immaturity, like wounding to healing, false self to true self. Do I want to find this in my life? But what I love about us as human beings is how our brain works, right? When we hear something like this, a journey, and we're like, if Jesus is following a journey, if to follow Jesus is a journey, is there a map? Is there an app? Is there landmarks from which I can find my way? Before we accept an invitation to many things in our lives, our desire is to know where we're going to go, what the journey is going to entail, what do I have to do, how will I invest my time, what is it going to look like for me, right? And from my own experience, I've had to choose to loosen the control and truly be dependent on God and what He has set out for me as I accept the invite to apprentice to His Son, Jesus. Look at a few moments from the life of Jesus as He invited the disciples, the 12 guys that He did life with, into this journey and a relationship with Him. Mark chapter 1. Jesus, it says, passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea. They were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Matthew chapter 9, another encounter. Jesus went from there, it says, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. And there are many other accounts where we can read in the life of Jesus where He called these men to follow Him. You can look at the 4 Gospels. We don't have time for it right now to do them all. But what you notice here is that these men had lives. They had professions. They had a direction. They probably had a map in their mind of what they wanted to do with their lives. Fishermen, tax collectors, others were architects. Others followed other teachers or rabbis, apprenticed under other people. But what I find interesting here for me, as I read these encounters Jesus had with these men, is that I don't think they truly had a grasp on what kind of journey Jesus was inviting them into or on. They didn't ask for a map or a list of things that it involved. The invite from Jesus was drawing them in, and all they could do was drop everything and follow and be an apprentice. What they found out quite quickly was that this journey that Jesus was inviting them into was a journey that involved deep, intimate relationship with Him that would lead them into having their souls spiritually formed and infused with the living God by the Holy Spirit. The journey that Jesus invited them, these men, and I would add many women to, was that it reflected the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of this world. And what I'm here to tell you today is that Jesus, again, is inviting you and I onto the same journey today through what is called the practicing of the way. An apprenticeship that truly says more of you and less of I. But here's the thing, we need to ask questions around this. If I say yes to this journey that is a relationship, and some of you whisper, is there a map? How do I, as John Mark Comer puts it, be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did? It's a great question. How do I do this? I want to introduce you to something that might be a reminder for some of us, but many of us, it might be brand new. And it's the term called spiritual disciplines. Let me define it like this so we can quickly have a grasp and an understanding of what it means for us today as we journey in relationship into the invite of a journey with Jesus, walking alongside him. Spiritual disciplines are practices that help us cultivate intimacy with Jesus, where they lead us to grow into his image and to his likeness. Now, I know some of these words in here probably make us feel weird and cringe a little bit, like the word disciplines. Like, that's real icky for some of us. I don't even know why I used icky, but like, it makes us cringe inside. Some of us don't even like the word spiritual because other religions, other faith-based things or ideas around life and faith, they use this word and they abuse it. So spiritual feels gross. So let me say it like this and define it for you like this in layman's terms, or even I would say my terms because I have to do this for myself. They are regular day-to-day practices and habits that show up in our daily life that connect us to Jesus. Practices and habits. See, if you look at Jesus' life, he took time to be intentional with practices and disciplines and how he walked. Like spending time in prayer with God, reading the scriptures, did life with people in community. He lived a simple life. He fasted. He went time for solitude and silence. He also kept the Sabbath. And as an apprentice to Jesus, when we sit under his authority and we walk closely to him, and some say, get covered in the dust of the rabbi, you walk so closely that you're covered in his dust, we do as he did, the practices and the habits. And what we are essentially getting at here is that these practices will begin to have a formation on our lives where we are being spiritually formed into Christ's likeness. What's wild here is when I use this word formation, we need to all understand that it isn't just a Christian thing, formation. It's a human thing. Let me put it like this for us. I grew up in London, Ontario, basically all my life. That's where I was raised. That's where I roamed the streets. I got in trouble on the streets. I was in London. I lived in the big city, but not so big city like Toronto, right? And like many cities this size, hundreds and thousands of people live in this city. Students come in, it populates even more. And what I found as I lived there, that there was a pace of life so quick and at a speed that I never had really considered. Until my wife and I, we moved to Exeter, a small town 4 years ago, not like Poplar Hill Village small town or Clinton small town. It's a little bit bigger, but it's a small town. And at the time, I was not working for the church, so I was driving from Exeter to London Monday to Friday, 8 to 4, and for about a month of a layover, this was my life. But I noticed something as I drove into the city from my small town life that I enjoyed so much. I could literally feel my heart and my mind going at a pace that was making me feel anxious, worried, and I started to not even see straight. I had blurred vision. But when I left and I got back to the small town that I lived in, I sensed a sense of peace or even a slower pace of life, and it really impacted me. The things that I surrounded myself, the way I was living was really impacted by what I surrounded myself. The quick examples are also like this: the podcasts you listen to, the movies that you watch, the music, the people, the jobs, everything we do influences our lives, and we will be formed into the things we do, listen to, and surround ourselves with. I use these quick illustrations because what we do and surround ourselves with will form the depths of who you are and the being of who you are, your soul, consciously or unconsciously. But the Christian formation that Jesus leads us into is counter. It works against the formation of the worldview and what it has for your life. It's the complete opposite. And like I said earlier, it's going from immaturity to maturity. It's going from wounding to healing, from false self to true self. And Dallas Willard, who writes many books around this, says it so beautifully. It's the renovation of the heart, where the renovation of our heart fights against the things of this world. And let me add, not in an aggressive way, Not in a way that is chaotic or destructive. It stands firm in the way Jesus walked at a slow pace. It renovates and shapes and forms your heart into beauty and wonder. Writers in the Bible take this very seriously. They had a beautiful grasp on it as well and wanted the readers and the people of that day, and thankfully us today, to understand that the goal of an apprentice to Jesus wasn't to look like the world. It was the complete opposite. That's why sometimes it's called the upside down kingdom. It was to look like Jesus. Paul, a New Testament writer, really hit the nail hard on this one in his New Testament letters to the church. Romans chapter 12, he says, do not be conformed to this world. Like I describe it as, he's saying, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. In the same letter, he goes on to say in Romans chapter 8, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son. This was the plan God had for you and I as apprentices to Jesus, to reflect his image Son and his likeness. Paul again in another letter writes in 2 Corinthians, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Like raise your hand if you want freedom in life. Absolutely. True freedom, not like just quick hits of freedom. He goes on to say, we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image. These quick 3 verses, but intentional verses, give us the goal for our apprenticeship to Jesus. And it's to be formed and transformed into Christ's likeness and the image of how he lived and walked and lived on this earth with intentionality and value. I got to be completely honest with you. If you know me a little bit, I'll be honest with almost anyone. I have been an absolute 2-year-old. Shouldn't say an absolute 2-year-old. I've been acting like a 2-year-old with my relationship with God this week. I constantly have been asking the question, why? Now, some of you just literally had the hairs on your neck like stand up because you might be like me. You have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old running in your house like screaming, why? Or maybe it's the PTSD of a son or daughter screaming that at the top of their lungs. But I have been asking the question, why? Because I've been asking this intentionally. Why should we be formed into Jesus and his likeness? Paul writes in Galatians chapter 5. The same guy that wrote the few verses before. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and against such things there is no law. This is why. The Apostle Paul, who wrote this and accepted the invite from Jesus to journey with him, and in a relationship describes the life of Jesus right here. This is why it is so important. It's Jesus' way of life. As it's cultivated and infused into our lives, we are formed into what Paul talks about, love and joy and peace. Who doesn't want to be around a person that is full of these things? See, when we cultivate these characteristics of Christ in our lives, everything changes. Work, family, friends, enemies, hobbies, teams, mom groups, your CrossFit gym. That's a cult. Everyone's afraid to join you, but it changes. Ron, our lead pastor, just joined a CrossFit gym. We're praying for him. Maybe he'll change the world there. Finances, you can talk about poverty changes, sexual immorality changes, politics, school, playgrounds, everything changes. If more people were walking and living the way Jesus did, our world would change. And guess what? This matters to God. And this is why we as Christians are called into the likeness of Jesus. I'm pretty sure C.S. Lewis says that we will be little Christians, little Christs walking around, image bearers, reflecting him. I'd like to let some of the air out of the room and say this. I know this is tough. Some of you are sitting in your seat and you're like, I just want to leave. I know this is tough for you. I know this is tough for me. It sounds like a lot of discipline. And it is. But no shame and no guilt here. Because this way of life that we live in this world has seasons. It has ebbs and flows, ups and downs, highs and lows. And I have felt like this. Like, it's been real for me. During the time where we weren't allowed to see each other a few years ago in gathering spaces like we are today, I was challenged by my spiritual father, David Campbell, to reflect on my walk with Jesus. And because I have a little bit of a competitive spirit, some people would say a lot. I would say it's mild. Just throw a hockey helmet on me and you'll see what I'm talking about. I called it this. When I was reflecting on my walk with Jesus, I called it this: the way I live versus my walk with Jesus. And in this time of reflection, I was full of wrestling and questioning and even noticing that my rhythms and practices of my life were not lining up with my walk with Jesus. And I'm not saying I was completely off in left field and being a heretic and not walking the walk, but the walk that I was walking in ways was spontaneous and without a guide. I was like kind of just walking around and being like, I got this, but I really didn't. And I really had to do the hard work with God of where I was wandering in my ways with my apprenticeship to his son, Jesus. And I came to the conclusion, and the conclusion was this: if my practices and rhythms of my life don't have intention or value, your life will reflect chaos, spontaneity, and an anxious presence. And the last time I checked, friends, that's the complete opposite of how Jesus walked and lived on this earth. Jesus was a man that lived with value, purpose, and intention. It was because he was a non-anxious presence living a life that was so close to the Father. His intentions, his practices, his rhythms of life were making him closer to the Father, not pushing him away. Intention, value, and purpose he lived with. I don't know if you know this, but we all live with intentionality, consciously or unconsciously. You got a job, you work 9 to 5, you wake up, you put intention, you put some clothes on, hopefully, intentionally put the clothes on. You drive to work with intention, you get there. Sometimes you don't want to be there, but you're intentionally there. The kids' sports teams that we pay thousands and thousands of dollars for 3 or 4 times a week, there's intention there. You put value in it. Night classes because you got a promotion, so you're kind of like scrubbing up your skills and you're getting better. You put intention in that. CrossFit 1 to 2 times a week. It's a cult, but you still put intention into it. But what happens is, when we let these things of this world be priority number one, our spiritual formation into who Jesus is takes a hit. And some of us, it's taken the biggest hit we've ever had in our lives. And what I found about myself is that I allowed the world to be my priority, but all the while still being serious about Jesus, but not serious about my formation. Where then I came to realize that the way I live and my walk with Jesus were like two competitors going head to head and not working together. They were just clashing, spontaneous, chaotic, reckless. They were butting heads. They weren't working together. Let's take a moment to just take a step back, breathe, and ask ourselves. And please don't guilt yourself and don't shame yourself here in this moment. Ask the question, have I been intentional with my formation, or am I just going through the motions? Now, you might be a note taker and you're just taking notes, so write that question down and answer it later or answer it in the moment right now. Or maybe you're just in your head, am I intentional with my formation or just going through the motions? And then after that question, answer this one. Does my relationship with Jesus influence every aspect of my life? And I say this with all humility and love because I too am in process of the renovation of the heart as well, and what it looks like to apprentice and walk with Jesus. And what I've fallen in love with for the last few months is looking at the disciples that walk so closely with Jesus in the flesh. I love looking at the Bible and seeing that they said yes to this journey, but they were also human beings like me. It releases the pressure because they constantly ask questions, some super smart, some really dumb questions. But they wrestled with who he was and how he lived. They messed up sometimes, fumbled the ball, but they saw the importance to keep close to him and who he was because he was radically different than anyone else that they had ever encountered. Why? Because they wanted to be with him, become like him, and do what Jesus did. See, before we finish our time together, I want to go back to the phrase that I've used a few times today, practicing the way. And a few of you probably wanted to say out loud and shout at me, open that up before I say yes. So let me open it up. The next few weeks on Sundays in Connect groups that are launching very soon, the first week of February, we're going to open up the life of Jesus. Look intentionally at the practices and rhythms that Jesus lived out. And we're going to look at 7 practices of Jesus' life, practicing the way. Next week, we're going to look at community and how Jesus actually committed himself to a group of people which became family. We're going to look at scripture as well in the coming weeks, speaking to God and listening to God. It's a two-way street. We're going to look at scripture, meditating on God's word. We're also going to look at silence and solitude. This may freak some people out, but it's absolutely beautiful because you're turning down the volume of the world to turn up God in your life. And then fasting, we're also going to look at. Now, some people are absolutely like saying, I got to go home. We're going to look at what it means to starve the flesh and feed the spirit through fasting. Sabbath, a day of rest and enjoying God and the fruit of your labor that you use with your hands and made with your hands. We're also going to look at simplicity, on what it means to abide in God's goodness and not just ourselves. And see, here's the thing. As we journey together throughout these weeks, many of us are going to feel the tension because the way of Jesus looks upside down to the way this world operates. Many of us might find a sense of peace and direction, and we might have to put like a seatbelt on you because you're so fired up to go. And some of us will constantly ask the question, why? But here's the thing. We need to all understand. As we begin or continue to practice the way of Jesus, it unlocks a rule of life that leads us to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. Now, let me be clear here with the language I just used. It isn't a rule for life, it is a rule of life. And a rule of life that is steeped in intention and value and is saying, I, as a Christ follower, want to be intentional with my spiritual formation patterns, habits, and practices so I may reflect him. Almost all of us in this room today have had a moment in our lives where we had no idea what was going on in our life. We had no sense of direction or map. We felt lost. We had no control on what was going on. Jesus' way of life through spiritual disciplines is the roadmap that we've all been asking for and desiring to have in our hands. And his way of life leads us on a pathway of what it means to walk closely through life with God the Father and how he intended it to be, and full of love and grace and mercy and beauty and wonder. And what's amazing as we discover these practices in our life and they become part of who we are, we'll discover that these practices are an act of worship. Jesus' life can be summed up as worship because he fixed his eyes on God the Father above anything else, not of this world, but of God. And he walked with God. And now in this world is our in-between, gives us that roadmap and helps us to see that the relationship that God has and that he desires for us can be full of richness, beauty, and wonder through practicing the way. So I ask you, will you apprentice under Jesus and walk in his ways of life? Peace and grace to you.